Bill, thanks for being with us. I'm not sure if you got to catch a lot of that conversation between Andrew Kara and the chairman also, but what are your what's your take on what this might mean, say, for Microsoft's efforts to buy a huge gaming company?
I mean, in general, what you heard in that interview was a mix of both determination, ambition, and realism. There's unmistakably a greater determination to look at large transactions, such as the deal announced yesterday, in greater detail and with a bit more skepticism. Large transactions involving tech and other sectors are going to get a closer look. That's an unmistakable commitment from the FTC and Department of Justice statement yesterday, and underscored by the chair's comments. At the same time, there's an acknowledgement about the constraints that you just mentioned. The agencies right now have a very significant number of matters in action, in flight already. And it greatly limits how many more things you can add to the mix. Congress has been talking for 18 months about more money, but they haven't provided another dime yet. So until that happens, the execution of the broader program is harder to carry out. And you heard the answer, the chair's answer to Kara Swish's question. How do you approach this, knowing that you don't have a whole lot of time? And their answer was with a fierce sense of urgency. But that severely limits how many targets you can go after and how successfully you can go after each one. So we heard the voice of both ambition, but also stark realism as well.
Now, Bill, we've been talking about Marguerite Vestager over in Europe for a long time. I think she first assumed office back in 2014. What's the impact of just the structure here in the U.S. of regulatory approach and leadership versus other places? The idea that the clock is running out on the regulator is somewhat unique.
And it's our perspective. In many respects, the United States, Washington, is not the capital of the regulatory world anymore. It's Brussels. And the Vice President Vestager is a good example of that. The Europeans are charging ahead with the legislative measures that we're still talking about and considering. The Digital Markets Act is going live this year. In the United Kingdom, there's the consideration of the Digital Markets Unit, which could go live this year or next year. Major foreign authorities, most notably in Brussels, are going ahead, and in some ways, we're still relying on older technology that involves long-running, years-long litigation of cases. So in many respects, we're following. And the longer it takes to put a program in place, the more likely it is that the global standards to be set are going to be set by the European Union, not by the United States.
Hey, Bill, it's Deirdre. When you were FTC chair, Chinese companies, they were growing quickly, largely unfettered by regulation in their home country, and they were really becoming these national champions. Times have certainly changed, and they touched on this in the interview. Lina Khan said this morning that Beijing's current crackdown would make it more difficult for American tech giants to make this argument that they need to be able to compete on the global stage. Do you think that this is an important shift and one that will feature, whether it be the Microsoft deal and having to, counter Tencent, some of the other companies having to counter TikTok or other big Chinese companies?
I think it is an important development, and in many respects, the explanation for it is part of a question that Kara and Andrew asked the chair, which is why is this happening? And she mentioned that there's anxiety, I think, in many countries that the companies in question have become, in effect, surrogate governments, that they now perform the functions of states. I think those comments tend to be focused more on Facebook and Google in the United States, but it's unmistakable in China that one of the concerns that the government had is that these companies were asserting a role that the government traditionally is viewed to be its own. So I think in the background is this continuing concern, certainly in China, but in the United States as well, that firms have assumed, in effect, a public stature, but without public accountability. Notice how interesting it was when Kara asked the chair, are you saying that these companies are governments? She hesitated. She said, that's an interesting question. That's a question that deserves a larger conversation. But part of the measured tone of her comment was she did not jump in and said, yes, I do, and that's why they have to be regulated. So we heard the chair be cautious on a number of these broader propositions about what's happening in the market.